shouldn't expect things to be handed to you. Then great founders will find a way. I mean, even when I think about some of these companies we've backed early, the ones that really just were outsiders to Silicon Valley, they what did they do? They got a one-way ticket. They flew here. They hunted people down. They did everything possible, and like that's what you got to do.
Welcome to Divot, the community for people making their mark on the world, where each week I sit down with the greatest minds in business, tech, sports, and entertainment to uncover the moments and decisions and lessons that shape their journey so you can shape yours. Go to divot.org to learn more. Subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcast, or Spotify.
Divot.
Today, we're in beautiful Palo Alto, California, with a trailblazing investor who has backed thousands of entrepreneurs around the world. Christine Tsai is the CEO and co-founding partner of 500 Global, a venture capital firm with over $2.4 billion in assets under management and investments in more than 80 countries. Before 500, Christine spent years at Google and YouTube. Before that, she was at UC Berkeley and has now become one of the most recognized voices in investing. She's been named to the Forbes Midas list, and under her leadership, 500 has grown into one of the world's most active venture firms. They've reshaped how capital flows to startups all around the globe. Hope you enjoy it. Tell me about why your family originally moved here from Guam.
That's a good question, because there were two ways that they could have gone. To the Bay Area and then to LA. And each side of the family was in one location or the other. So I don't know what happened to eventually go to the Bay Area, but we ended up in the Bay Area, which is where my mom's family is. But I wonder what it would have been like if they moved to LA.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I'm sure. But I'm glad they chose the Bay Area.
What did your parents do in Guam? What did they do when they came here?
So my parents both immigrated from Korea. They were both, respectively post World War II, post Korean War born. So as you can imagine, Korea was a very different place. It's not like what it is today. It was war torn, very poor, just kind of strife with just a lot of things. And they each immigrated to Guam separately. So they met in Guam. And I think at the time, there were a lot of Koreans who would go to Guam because it's the US, but maybe a little bit easier to access. Is sort of some parallels to Hawaii, which is there's more Asians there. But they met in Guam. They came for different reasons, and then they married, had my brother and I, and then we lived there till I was 4, and then moved to the Bay Area or to the mainland.
How was it? I mean, being an immigrant and growing up here, were people welcoming? Was it very difficult? Every immigrant, every person that comes here starts with nothing, basically. So
Yeah,
it's really hard.
yeah, I think back, and I have the experience really of just being born and raised in the US. So as a child of immigrants, so I can only speak to that experience. But I do think about this a lot. Maybe as I get older and my parents are getting older, I think, wow, can you imagine leaving behind your family and moving to a completely foreign country, looking for more opportunity, a better life? And I mean, I think the fact that they did move to Guam first, where some of the family had already gone, was probably helpful. Thankfully, both my parents spoke English pretty well. So I think that probably afforded them a little bit more opportunity than if they had no English speaking skills. But interestingly, Guam is actually where my mom decided to pick up computer science, and she was programming with punch cards. I should ask her. I just realized I've never asked her why did she want to do computer science of all things. Because when she left Korea to come to Guam,
Wow.
she was a chemistry major, so very different field.
Yeah.
And computers, it's not like today where everybody's vibe coding. It was probably a pretty opaque foreign field, especially for a female student.
So you were raised just pretty much right in the heart of Silicon Valley, and you go to UC Berkeley. Was the intent always, I'm going to be in tech, I for sure want to be in tech, or was this something that you kind of stumbled into along the way?
It's a little bit of both. So, of course, growing up with a parent who's an engineer in Silicon Valley at Intel of all places, there was definitely a lot of encouragement to at least understand computer science and programming. I'm sure my mom maybe unsuccessfully tried to teach me programming when I was younger, but I naturally was very curious about technology, about computers, about the internet, and I found it so fascinating. So that was definitely something that I was passionate about. But in terms of career choices, I think, growing up in that time, I guess when I graduated high school, it was the mid or late 90s. Especially when I think about what the schools offered, there wasn't like a entrepreneurship or like start a company, anything like that. It was a lot of the very traditional fields. People might want to be a doctor, be an engineer, be a lawyer, or whatever. So I didn't necessarily think, oh, I'm going to become a tech person. I mean, it wasn't quite like that. I knew I wanted to do something in that world, but the only real definitive thing I thought was I want to build websites. It's really fun. It's kind of cool.
You joined Google in the really early days, 2003, I think. What was how many people were there then, and what was it like?
I think when I joined, this is 2003, so it was about a year before the IPO. I think at least in the Mountain View campus, there was maybe about 1,000 employees, might have been give or take around that number. But it was definitely, me coming in, it was not my first job out of college, but it was my second. And being pretty clueless, 22-year-old, it it felt very, I guess that was my exposure to corporate life, but it wasn't certainly, like, not very different from the typical corporate. It felt like what I thought a dot-com or startup would be. It was very small. The founders would meet with the entire company every Friday. That was a practice they kept up for a long time. I don't know if they still do that, um but it was definitely felt very, like, even as a a pretty clueless young employee, I felt like I was doing something, and it was a lot of fun, and Google was a product that I used in college. It's like, if I'm gonna work in the internet, this is the place to be, and they were probably one of the only companies I was hiring at the time, if you remember what the valley was like during 2002, 2003, right after the dot-com bubble burst.
I got here in 2005, and I just remember Google being the coolest, hardest place to get a job.
Yeah.
Was it like that in 2003? Had it clicked yet that this was gonna be this incredible company and everyone was trying to work there, or was it still a little bit before that?
It was probably right on the precipice of them becoming that. So, they I don't think it was tech itself was a mainstream thing, of course, but at that time, Google was clearly doing well. They were, a year out from going public. I think there was still a little bit of a, coming out of the dot-com bust. It's a pretty bleak time. And I think there are other players in the market that were still existent, and then I think eventually Google took off. But your point about it just being this really awesome place, they did a lot of things that were very unconventional. The "Don't be evil" mantra, being very mission driven. I totally remember wearing Google swag T-shirts, walking down the street, and people would just run up to me and say, "I love Google. It's so amazing." I don't know if anyone would say that nowadays, seeing someone wear a tech T-shirt and gushing about it. It was just such a different time, and it really, like, what an experience to have been at that company at that time.
Maybe it's like OpenAI or it's some AI, some of these young, lovable or Windsurf or I don't know. I don't know if it's totally comparable, but there is this feeling of like newness and freshness and
Yeah.
the new cool thing, the new, the coolest people are working on AI and building these generative AI products or some sort of side street to those.
Maybe. Actually, the only other time I can think of in recent times where I've worn some kind of logoed shirt that wasn't 500 and I've had that kind of reaction is when I wear my Canva
I
sweatshirt.
haven't thought, I figured you'd say that.
People will come up, "I love Canva, I use it, my kids use it," but anything else, so far I have yet to elicit that type of reaction.
When did 500 invest in Canva?
We invested in 2012, so it was, I think, their first round. The founders are very public about the story of how they flew here from Australia to Silicon Valley, got hundreds of rejections. A very small number of people actually said yes. We were one of them, and kind of the rest is history. But it's pretty amazing.
I mean, that's kind of a great example of what I feel like a lot of 500 has become famous for. You invest in a lot of companies here in the Bay Area, and some of those have ended up becoming some of the biggest and best companies here. but you also seem to find the canvas in places around the world. What is the ethos of 500 and how has it expanded across the 80 countries that you're in now?
So our mission, the way we articulate it today, is to uplift people and economies around the world through entrepreneurship. It is very nicely articulated that way now, but it wasn't when we first started. That said, the ethos was very similar, that we believed great talent existed everywhere, not just as a feel-good thing, but we actually saw that the rise of these different technology platform shifts, in terms of how people build companies. If you remember cloud and eventually mobile and these social distribution platforms, were going to fundamentally change how companies are built. A lot of parallels to what's going on today. And because of that, we felt that the barrier to start a company would go down, cheaper to start a company, and that meant more access for founders everywhere, especially outside of Silicon Valley. So it's funny to think that back then that was a very contrarian perspective, but it was. Today, it's maybe less so, but that was our bet back in 2010.
Was it immediately clear that this was going to be something that worked or a good idea, or did it take years and years and years to kind of
Oh,
become obvious?
no, it was not immediately obvious, and I think that's one of the things about very early stage venture. It's you don't know if you're doing a good job for a long time. So I do remember in the early days, we were quickly pegged as the Silicon Valley firm that was definitely unconventional, kind of strange, and invested in international companies, and that was not always seen as a good thing because, um, as you remember, the venture world was still maybe getting less opaque, but it still was sort of this ivory tower, sandhill road, um, very much Silicon Valley centric. People wouldn't even invest in New York or outside of Silicon Valley.
Right.
So there was even a bigger question on what kind of companies are outside of the US, like what kind of exits are there? There are some fair questions there even still today, but um, it was not seen, it was definitely seen as very contrarian, I will say.
How many companies have you invested in?
To date, we've invested in more than 3,000 and growing. That is inclusive of all of our companies, of course. So companies that have exited, companies that have died. Probably have close to 2,000 that are technically active and still going. But I expect that number to continue to grow. But yeah, when I hear that 3,000 over 15 years, it's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Many investors, I would say, look, we want to find specific companies and just get as much ownership as we can in them. Your model seems to be more of we want to just find as many of the great companies around the world. Does the ownership amount really matter to you? And do you continue to invest in them along the way? Or is it like, hey, we want to get in early and then, we'll support them the rest of the way, but not necessarily investing the rest of the way.
That's actually an example where we've evolved in our approach. So in the early days, one of the big things that we were known for was really trying to scale venture and kind of de-risk venture, early stage venture. And our approach was having a much larger portfolio, smaller checks, less sensitive to ownership. And over the years, I think we've learned a lot from that. And our first few funds have actually been a good testament to you need a good sized portfolio. The first couple funds are like top decile funds. We have great companies like a Canva or Talkdesk, Intercom. We've had a number of IPOs. But I think one of the things that we have evolved in our thinking is, while I don't know if we will necessarily be like super, super ownership focused, like we need 20% at pre-seed, we do see that there is value with having some meaningful ownership early. So I think that's where we've gotten a little bit in certain strategies, a little more concentrated, still balancing kind of the ownership with the portfolio size. Because I think we have a lot more data now, 15 years in.
In the early 2010s, there were literally thousands of startup incubators. There were thousands of programs. There was like one in every school, one in every city. And now here we are in 2025, and there's enough that you could sort of count on one hand that matter that survived that. What do you think made 500 so resilient through all the ups and downs where others, so many others came and went, but you all have been able to continue to invest and to be here?
There's always a reason for any firm, and I think for us, and especially how I think about 500, today and going forward is that some managers or some firms are not interested in building a legacy in terms of beyond them, and that's sometimes endemic with venture that it's very much focused on just the individuals. Succession planning is awful at succession planning, and that it's very much based on individuals. So where we have been different, and there are a number of great firms out there that have done a great job at this in terms of really building the platform and their brand versus any one person. I think that was always the vision to build 500 to be something that's lasting and enduring, and that's definitely my view that it's really so much about 500 Global as the firm and what we represent.
You've invested in people all over the world, more so than almost anyone else. What are the key ingredients that you're looking for in the people that are starting these projects and companies that you've seen sort of allow them to go the distance with their ideas?
A few that come to mind. So one is definitely founders who have a lot of humility. And why I say that is because I think if you stay humble, then you know that you don't know everything. And I think that is so critical because especially nowadays, there's so many things out of your control, whether there's a market dynamics, geopolitical situations that happen and technology changes so quickly. And I think if you're too stuck to like, I know everything, things are this way, and your ego is big and you're just, you don't have that kind of growth mindset or you're not curious, then it doesn't vote well. But I've definitely seen that a lot of the founders we've worked with that have been able to get to that level. They remain humble and that they're grounded. They know that things will evolve. They push themselves to be the better version of themselves every day, and as a result, I think their companies are better for it, that they continue to grow. Speed is always a thing. Sometimes it's not immediately obvious, but founders that just can move quickly, they're decisive. And then, I could go on and on, but I think the other thing that really comes to mind is that they just keep going. They just have that grit. They're persistent. They work hard. They show up even when it's hard. It's a very painful. It's just a lot of pain and blood and sweat and tears to build a company, and it's hard to keep going. There's this adage that companies fail when not because they run out of money, but when the founder runs out of energy. I absolutely believe that.
How have you seen the best founders persevere through those times when energy's getting low, resources getting low, not a lot of validation, but they keep going? What have you seen them do?
They don't it's very natural and easy to turtle up and kind of hide and not be out there, but I think a lot of the founders, and I've seen this with many of them, that I know I know things are tough because I hear the backstory or they tell me, one on one, but they're still showing up. I know there's kind of it's kind of a meme at this point, like they're in the arena or that kind of that term, but it's true. Like they're out there, they're putting themselves out there, they're still showing up. They could have a bad press article, and but they're still out there. They're still trying to hit milestones. I think that is always a good indicator that they just keep going, even when um, the market or investors or people just are doubting them. But it's hard. It is hard. But I feel like they just kind of keep going through hell.
To the having a short enough memory that you haven't forgotten or lost the lessons of the mistakes and the pain,
Yeah.
but also it doesn't become debilitating
Yeah.
and get you completely off track.
Yeah.
And I know some of the things I'm most embarrassed about with my startups and my companies, sometimes I bring them up, and almost 100% of the time, people are like, "What are you even talking about? I
Yeah.
don't I don't even I have no context. What happened?" And then I'm like, "Oh, shoot."
Like you don't even
It's
know.
like,
Yeah.
"Do you see," it's like this thing on my, and it's like when you talk about it, everyone starts looking at it. If you don't say anything, like, then it's just, a part of life, right? And
Yeah.
I feel like the best founders find a way to compartmentalize it enough where they can still learn from it, but it, doesn't inhibit them from continuing to grow, find the next thing.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think that happens more often than you realize that the rest of the world has very short-term memory, especially here in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley. it's a headline or it's a thing that happened, but you're not the center of your universe or center of their universe. But
Yeah.
then for you as the founder, it stays with you. And just from what I know, they can put on a good show, but, like, everybody has their thing, everybody has their chip, and they deal with it in the ways they can, but if they don't deal with it, then it comes out in things like this with the team where they feel like it's this big issue, and then they've obviously managed to hire great people who don't even know what that thing is. So, it's good advice where it's something that happened or, whatever it is, things that either you grow from that and you keep moving forward or you let it consume you. It's not easy.
I was recently tweeting with, of all people, Elizabeth Holmes from uh,
Oh, wow.
Theranos.
Is she able to tweet, I
It's
guess?
this very, I mean, that's what I asked, and from what I read, she has the ability to talk to someone on the phone, and they're reading tweets to her, and she can respond
Okay, okay.
during certain hours of the day. And it was, I'm talking to her, and then I'm reading, and you're kind of seeing her journey. I mean, mother of two in prison, gone through this crazy, experience, and you can see her humility. And after tweeting back and forth with her, at the end, I just kind of instinctively just said, "Hey, like, Silicon Valley loves a great comeback."
Mm.
And I mean, I think she's got another 10 years or something. But she's, she's reading, she's working, I think seems from the tweets, quite genuine in her sort of rehabilitation, what she's trying to do. And there is something unique here about the mindset where there's so many people that have tried so many things that didn't work, and yet they get the same people to fund their next idea, or they get the same people to join them on the next ride, even though the first one failed or the third one failed. And then they can find success. The first three fail, and the fourth one can be some huge hit. We read about that and see that all the time.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of very highly publicized controversial examples, and then there's all the stories you don't hear about, even in our own portfolio where there are founders who've been their first venture didn't go well, came back, we wanted to back them again because we know how hard it is to build a company, and the odds are, especially for early stage, that the majority of the companies will just fail or they just won't failure maybe isn't always the right term, but they're not gonna be that home run, outcome that you need. But depending on the business or the founder and how they executed, how they handled everything, then it's, there's definitely been founders that we wanted to back again. And I mean, I have a few on my list. I've told them, if you want to start another company, please tell me, because I know how they built the previous company that didn't go anywhere, and they did everything possible. I still think very highly of them as founders, and that sophomore or junior, that second or third attempt, sometimes it works. So now, if it's a much bigger thing, like a criminal charge or whatnot, I guess your mileage may vary in terms of whether you back that founder again. So it really is, it's hard for me to judge.
Right.
But I do think that you're right. Comeback stories people love, and I also think it speaks to maybe something more about like humanity, I guess. Like how much you how do you feel about like are people defined by the worst thing they've ever done, or do you forgive? Um, it's not a black and white response, but I do like to think that people can have that second chance.
Yeah, and especially our culture, certainly here in the Valley, but also in the United States, there is a culture of, hey, like, if you serve your time, if you learned in the example of didn't go to jail, didn't do anything criminally wrong, but just it didn't work,
Mhm.
and you worked as hard as you could and you had integrity,
Yeah,
let's take another shot, let's do it together.
yeah.
Do you see differences with the people that you fund here in the Bay Area versus people that you fund, let's say, outside the United States? Do they have to have a different mindset, or are they kind of the same person in a different location?
I think some of those qualities with founders in my mind are agnostic to where they're from or their ethnicity or where they where they grew up. So I know sometimes, I see this with a lot of investors. They'll try to kind of containerize or put people into buckets where they say, "Oh, founders from these ex-employees from this company tend to be better or work fast or." And in some of these different categorizations, there can be some truth to that, but I do think that it's you can't generalize, right? So, I think when we think about the founders that we've backed that have been successful, that have come from other markets, there's some commonalities in terms of I actually think it's even harder if you're coming from outside of Silicon Valley and you're trying to build a company in a market that isn't really, as mature because most likely it's not as, quote, "mainstream." Culturally, maybe your families are not a fan of you starting a company because there's a lot more implications if you fail. It's not like here where you can fail a company and then you can go work at OpenAI or pick your tech company. But I think those founders actually, if anything, they're doing even more with little, a lot less. So, maybe there actually is more grit that they have than a founder who went to Stanford and got an internship at a startup and lives in Silicon Valley. But I do think that in terms of qualities, kind of all the things I talked about where it's grit and moving quickly and kind of being humble and, um, maybe it's 10x that outside of Silicon Valley.
I've heard you talk about Fred Wilson's blog being kind
Yes.
of an important thing for you to educate you on venture. What parts of his ethos and some of the things he's shared made an impact on you?
There's a handful of people that when if you were to ask me about, "Oh, what was your journey into to starting 500 into venture," that had, an impact on me. Fred is definitely one of them, both from his blog and, like, him personally, but he was one of the few VCs that actually blogged. So this is long before podcasts and VC Twitter and social media where people, now everybody has some platform, some people talk too much, but this is like early mid 2000s. VC was a really opaque industry and he was, nonetheless he was in New York, not in Silicon Valley and he blogged. He was on Blogger, which is, eventually a Google product, and he was one of the only ones that blogged, and I remember when I first started reading his posts, it was largely because, they were just I don't know, they were just very interesting. He has a certain style where it's kind of very very matter of fact. This is how things
Concise.
are, very concise. And he would talk about building companies, his views on tech, and it was just like no one else was doing that. So, and then I learned he was a VC, and then I thought, oh, what's a VC? And then I kind of figured it out. And my takeaway was, oh, VCs get to work with these founders that are building the next Google and the next YouTube. That's really cool. And I just in my, wanting to get to know him and bring him to Google, to have him come speak at Google, I just cold emailed him and, he actually replied, and that's kind of how things started in terms of getting to know him, but, I do he's a storied, very legendary investor and very humble, and he did respond to my email, and he's kinda just very curious, and I love that.
It's surprising how many incredibly successful people will reply to a thoughtful cold email.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, almost every significant person I've met has been through a short cold email that I crafted over 2 hours and then
Nice,
the
nice.
perfect and sent it at the perfect, what I thought was the perfect time, and then followed up 5 times sometimes.
Yeah.
But they kind of always keep, or many of them keep the door open even far beyond huge levels of success.
It probably varies by the individual, but I think there are some that they just respond. They will maybe not every cold email, but, I don't know, there might be some, really successful people that will respond to everything or every tweet, or I mean, there's probably good some examples of people who respond to every tweet, but you're right. I think that's actually a very unique quality, I feel like, because you could always outsource that and have your people respond or don't respond or
Yeah, have someone filtering all of the outbound stuff to you first.
exactly. So, I can't say I respond to all cold emails, but I don't respond very often.
This is sort of one of the VC filters, isn't it? That you have to figure out the ways to get access to the investors.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the first hurdle that people perceive, I think, that like if you can't figure out how to thoughtfully get in front of an investor in the right way, then maybe that leads to other things like you can't thoughtfully build a team or you can't thoughtfully get the customers that you're going to need to get. Is that do you feel that of like people need to kind of get in and speaking with you and your team in the sort of the way that you should do it rather than just like expecting, yeah, just walk in the door and come talk?
Oh, I mean, I definitely think that for let's say for founders, the everything is working against them, right? The odds are they will fail. So if whatever they have to do, if they have to actually figure out a product that people want to buy or that is actually useful, that's one thing. If they need to hire people, they got to convince people that this is a vision they want to get on board with. And then if they want to take outside capital, then they're going to have to find a way to get that outside capital. So I think maybe in the theme of like nothing's handed to you, and maybe that's more of because that's how I grew up, where you shouldn't expect things to be handed to you. Then great founders will find a way. I mean, even when I think about some of these companies we've backed early, the ones that really just were outsiders to Silicon Valley, they what did they do? They got a one-way ticket, they flew here, they, hunted people down, they did everything possible, and, like, that's what you gotta do, you know?
You've had hundreds of investors, maybe more, honestly, come through the doors at 500 over the last 15 plus years. What, in your mind, are the key ingredients to making a great early stage investor?
There's some parallels in terms of what makes a great early stage investor and then, like, founders. I mean, I think some of the things I feel around being curious and humble and kind of persistence and speed, like those things apply both to the other side of the table for early stage founders. But I think the ones that are really focused on um, perfecting their craft early on. So let's say for early stage founders, whether they're maybe angel investing or building a fund, I think same thing there. Odds are against them. There's a lot of investors out there. There's a lot of very successful investors out there. So how do you stand out and how do you convince founders to take your capital versus somebody else? You have to start somewhere, right? So you have to really start with like, what is it that I bring to the table? Like, what is the game I'm trying to play? And then you just work towards that. I I definitely for me, it's very hard to be somebody I'm not, and I think oftentimes that happens where people feel like, "I have to be like so and so," or, "I gotta be like that firm," and, in the end, it's not authentic, people see that, and it doesn't work, but, I think for anyone, despite what opinions there are that there's too many VCs, there's too many investors, there's too many startups, I mean, you can listen to that or you can do what you want, but if you're gonna really persist through it, you gotta be very focused.
What are the things that you really over index on? What are you great at?
For me, as a core value, trust is really important. It's it's hard for me to, if I've really built trust with an individual or a person, then both ways, like it's pretty, for the most part, it's pretty strong. But if there is a reason to, if that trust gets broken, then it's a different story. But I think that's something I feel like I'm good at in terms of doing what I can to build trust with people. So, there's probably it's probably a double-edged sword sometimes, but I think if you talk with my colleagues and my partners and maybe founders that I've worked with, they will say that maybe that if she says she's going to do something, she follows through, she'll circle back, she'll check in, um, she'll be upfront about something even if I don't like it. And I think all of those factors are like they're elements of how you build trust. And it's something I take very seriously. It's something that is really important to me, and, I do what I can to really feel like others can trust me. So, I think that in a world where there's a lot of things move fast, both on the founder side and even on the capital side, like with our investors, I think it's hard to do, especially when sometimes things feel very transactional, where founders will come to you to raise money, but that's about it and they disappear. They come back to raise money again. But I think that's like whether it's within your own team or people you work with, like it's critical.
How can I, as a founder, build more trust with my investors and with people that I'd like to invest in my company?
When I think about that question, like how have good founders built trust with me as an investor? I think is that they're very open with how the company is doing. So they have a regular cadence. This is just honestly just base, like, kind of table stakes at this point. So they will share, like, on some sort of regular cadence, like, what's going well, but also what's not going well, where they need help. If they have nothing that's not going well, then I question that because every company has something imploding at any given point in time, no matter how successful the company is. So I think just being upfront and candid about those things is definitely a way to build trust, as well as like how they communicate. So if they're quick to respond, if they're responsive generally, they want to they want to meet up even when it's not about a fundraise or whatnot. I think those are all kind of things that build in. There's a lot of I think about like some founders that I've known for a long time, some where back their subsequent ventures. And I think a lot of it comes down to I just really trust those founders. How each of them respectively have built trust are the things that I mentioned. But I think the one thing that I didn't mention in terms of how you really do build trust is how people behave when things are not good, both on the company side or, personal side, but I think how they show up, how they handle it, how they treat you as a stakeholder is it goes a long way. Because when things are good, everyone's happy, you all trust each other, but when things are bad, then you really find out.
And I'm sure you've heard from all the way on one spectrum to all the way on the other spectrum of both founders and investors, good and bad behavior in the good and the bad times. What do you think for investors? What advice would you have for people that are sitting on boards or people that are making investments of when things start to go bad? What should your role be with a company and how should you treat, assuming the team isn't doing anything nefarious or, or illegal or whatever, but if it's just like it's not working, w- how do you advise investors in sort of what their role is in helping the company from there?
I would say definitely you should be a partner to the team, to the management, to your founders, and of course, there's always gonna be a question of how did this happen? How did we get here? What we could have done better? That's for another time. Depending on what it is, let's say there's some real crisis going on. The best thing you can do is say, okay, let's move this. How do we move this forward? How can I help you? How can I help get to a solution? And that might be, sitting with the team, helping them connect with intros and knowing that there's urgency in some of these situations and that you too have that urgency to go out and make a call or help them with whatever is going on. Then when things are resolved, hopefully then there's some time for how do we prevent this from happening? But I think what has often happened when I see other situations, and I hear about this from founders that have to deal with their board or their investors that are behaving in a way that isn't productive and they come to us, is that there is a lot of uh, finger pointing, and that's not productive in any way. So I think the more you can really help to be a sounding board. It doesn't mean that you just do whatever the founder says, right? So clearly there's blind spots that founders have, but I think just in the moment when you're really trying to help the company solve something, it's really more about like how can I help you come up with a solution, be your thought partner, and like we're partners. We want the same outcome. We want this to be successful, um, rather than uh, like why is it this way, and and kind of like thinking company's not going anywhere. I'm not going to spend my time with them because again, it's in those crisis moments that true colors come out, and you don't wanna be that type of partner to a founder.
When I think about you and 500, I sometimes go back, 12, 13 years, and I can sort of have this picture in my head of this kind of chaotic, beautiful, like coolest views in any startup if anybody had ever been there, but just kind of chaotic small office. I can sort of picture you in sort of one corner, like in t-shirt, kind of working hard and probably very late at night. I On the weekends it was an incredibly busy place. And now, this C500 now, and it's like you're running this global organization and uh, have invested in thousands of startups. Was this the plan? Are you where you expected to be? Are you where you want to be? Is there somewhere else to go, or is this kind of like, how does this fit in with sort of if you looked at yourself 20 years ago and you saw yourself now, would you say, oh, that was where I was headed? Or would you say, how in the world did I get there? And where am I going from there?
I'll start with like me personally, would I have thought this 20 years ago that I would be where I am today? Absolutely not. And I mean, very specifically, like what would, let's say if 20 years ago, I was probably very early in my career, is like 25. Yeah. So that's how old I am. So you just add 20. But 20 years ago, I would never have thought, okay, my vision is going to be that I start a venture firm and I'm going to be the CEO. Like, absolutely not. I will say very transparently, I don't think I ever really had aspirations that I'm going to be a CEO one day. More power to the people who believe that. That just wasn't me. I just knew that I wanted to work with great people, work on very cool products and technology, and always be at the forefront of tech because that was so much fun for me. And I didn't necessarily think about like that I had to be a certain position. So no, I never thought I would be in this role. Um, in terms of 500 itself, I think, when we, going back 15 years in 2010, I think maybe very, very aspirationally, we thought 500 would be this big thing. But as you know, like, we too were a startup. We were first time fun, like probably had no idea what we were doing and a lot of mistakes along the way. So I think there was always kind of this dream, like, yes, of course, our vision is going to be this big thing. But in terms of when I look back, like back then, and if I saw what we were going to be today, would I have thought that? I mean, in some ways, yes, because there was that aspiration, but maybe the path on how we got there wouldn't have expected that. And certainly would have not expected all of the changes in the world and technology that have happened, because when you look at the world landscape and the technology back then, like who would have even thought now 15 years later just how different it is. It's like so different in terms of like the technology. I mean, if you think about 2010, it was a couple years after the iPhone launched and mobile technology was still pretty nascent. I mean, it's not like that today, but just looking that far out, I don't think we would have ever, thought that, not because not that it was impossible, it's just things have moved so quickly and so differently, and in terms of 500 and, like, going forward, I mean, sometimes I think, "Man, what am I gonna wake up to tomorrow?" And, like, something else is gonna drop, something's gonna happen. It's just the velocity at which this change happens is just, like, faster and faster. So, I think, like, what is different today that, versus 15 years ago at the beginning of 500, it's very different in terms of how companies are built and just, like, everything.
Outside of family, who's the person that you most admire?
These days, it's actually Lisa Su, who's CEO of AMD, and I I I was thinking about this in terms of, like, why, and I just know that anytime there's an article about Lisa, any interview, any video, any podcast, I always stop to listen to it, and there's something about her story, but even how she responds and just what I can glean of her personality and her leadership and frankly the results, the fact that she's been able to turn around AMD and get to where it is, and I'm sure they're still discounted as being far behind NVIDIA, but I don't know, I just seeing how, empires rise and fall and just never count out the underdog. I'm rooting for Lisa, but I think there's just a lot about the way she leads that I resonate with. Maybe it's the fact that um, she seems a bit more introverted like me. She's very very calm and stoic, but she's just like underneath. She's just this like badass person of a leader. So um, I hope I meet her one day. But I really look up to her.
If you could implant one idea into everyone in the world, what would it be?
That at the end of the day, everybody is human. I think we forget that, especially when we are arguing with people on the internet and looking at people as groups of l- just kind of in this bucket of nameless, faceless people that I don't agree with. But I think even aside from that, remembering that the founders you back are human, they have their own reasons for starting the company. They have a lot of things going on with them that you might not realize, or it's a client you're working with or someone on your team or your own investors, like why they act the way they are. I think ultimately I have found that the best way to go about it is to really understand people as humans and the fact that they are human. They're not just this entity or this group of people with political views. I think it's just people have forgotten that, um, and it's led to a lot of unfortunate things.
What's the hardest thing you've ever accomplished?
I think the hardest thing that I've accomplished is probably the role that I'm in now. That I'm today I'm CEO of 500. I didn't come in as the CEO, and coming into that role is now been it's now been 8 years, which is hard to believe, but and in some ways thinking that that was so long ago is an accomplishment in and of itself. But when I think about, sometimes people ask, "What was the hardest thing you ever had to go through?" Or, "What was the hardest professional, personal?" I think back 8 years ago, and that was really the hardest thing that I can think of. And I used to do this thing where I would dismiss it saying, "Well, that was just, professional life, and, it's not like I went through war and, like, somebody died." But, yes, that is true. Nobody died, I guess, in a way, or it wasn't wartime, but it was definitely, an incredibly challenging period of my life that is still even to this day, it's not easy to talk about. But I think in terms of having accomplished something, I think it was, you know, being thrown into that situation, and now just to think that that was 8 years ago. And I'm not the same person I was back then. I think in terms of when I think about what founders can learn from tough moments, whatever it is, there's a lot that I will say that I think, do I take that advice? I try to, and I think in some ways I have, but ultimately I think you should look at it as like what can you grow? Like how can you grow from a tough situation? And it's an opportunity to see what you're capable of.
What's your best advice for overcoming hard things?
It's actually something that a good friend used to say to me when I was going through a very tough time, which was very simple, just chin up. And you can interpret it however you want, but to me, chin up was basically believe in yourself, keep going, find that circle of people that will help you so you don't have to do it alone. Just have that vision of what will things look like when you get through this tough time and know that it is temporary. But in the meantime, keep your chin up, keep showing up, keep shipping, keep building. Much easier said than done, to be honest, because you're gonna have those days where the last thing you wanna do is show up or keep your chin up, but that is something that actually stays with me even 8 years later since the time that he would say this to me over and over again. But it's something that has you could take that advice into any situation, just to believe that you will get through it.
What accomplishment are you most proud of?
It is the life and family I've built with, my husband and 2 kids. I think at the end of the day, that's what I come home to. I think about this more as the kids are getting older, in high school and middle school, and they always were their own person, but they're really becoming their own persons and their own lives, and yet I feel like I still have that connection with them, and, um, I'm just very like, when I think back, let's say, hopefully many decades, many years from now, later in life, like, maybe I'm towards the end of my life, like, what will I have regretted or what will I be proud of? And, um, I'm sure there's a lot of things, but I think the one thing that stays with me is, like, is the life that we've built, and, like, no matter what choices they make or how they turn out, that I'll be proud of that.
What is the biggest impact you want to make on the world?
I think that what we have done just what 500 has done, and I hear this from founders that have come up to me is, it'll be in passing. They'll say 500 believed in me when everyone didn't. They were the only ones that cared to go into this market when everyone else didn't see opportunity. And that's like a running theme that we have that early belief in people or in countries or whatever it is. And I think in terms of the impact that is lasting long after me would be still that same kind of entrepreneurial first believer kind of approach that we will and want to be early believers in companies long before others see it. If they're overlooked because they don't understand the market, they don't look like the typical founder, whatever that means, or they don't take the time to really understand that there is huge potential. I mean, it's kind of an ancillary of our mission that we invest in the world's potential. And the world is a big place, of course, but it's also a small place when you think about founders innovating in technology and building great things. So I hope that, my vision for 500 is that we are that enduring, enduring firm that continues to do that, that continues to uplift people and economies. And it's exciting in many ways to see how that changes. It is sometimes hard to keep track of how quickly things move, but that's the impact I want to see, that some founder in some remote part of the world is able to build like an iconic, enduring company, and it's because 500 was there.
And finally, how do you measure your life?
I think it has to do with the quality of the relationships that I have. I actually, and also the fact that I wasn't thinking about, oh, that we raise billions of dollars. I mean, that's obviously specific to like to 500, but I think in terms of my life, it really is the quality of the relationships and what I mean to other people. And of course, it's my family, friends, some of the partners that I've had the privilege to work with for years and years. Like I feel like it's crossed that chasm from just kind of this business relationship to like just they're just human relationships that I really deeply care about. And I definitely don't think of it as quantity, but I feel like just a handful of really quality, meaningful, trusting, enduring relationships that are with people that will go through hell and back with you matter way much more than anything else.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pivot. On next week's episode.
No one's gonna govern my income ever. Like I just said that, I'm 18 years old. I was like, no one's gonna determine my income. Like I'm not gonna be limited to that. Like I'm gonna do what I'm called to do at any cost.